Welcome to this edition of Seen and Solved. I'm your host, Tim Pennington. Today, we're talking again with Connor Callais, a product manager at Hubbard-Hall. We're going to be talking about conversion coatings again, and we're going to be talking about the chemical control side and the post-treatment. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Seen and Solved podcast, brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. Better results, less chemistry.
So, Connor, earlier you were talking about controlling. I know there's, the time and temperature is always so important in baths. Let's talk about the maintaining the chemical control with that.
So we talked about, our time and temperature, but the third variable that is crucial for all of these or immersion processes is the actual concentration of the chemistries that we're using. So whether that be, making sure our cleaner is at 10% by volume, or our phosphate solution, we're going to be monitoring, the total and the free acid for it, or the dissolved iron. All of these chemical applications have, parameters for the concentration they need to be used at. Generally, we're going to recommend those are checked at least twice a shift. So, every few hours, an operator is going to pull a solution of those chemistries and do titrations on the side, some actual benchwork chemistry to make sure that we're staying within those parameters that we need to be at. We do it for a number of reasons. One, it ensures consistency in the coatings and the colorings that we're going to be actually applying. So we want to maintain our cleaners to make sure we're properly and effectively cleaning the solution. They're cleaning the parts adequately every time. And then the actual conversion coating, if we don't maintain the right parameters, we can either drift in terms of our coating weights if we're applying a phosphate, or we end up with some over etching of the parts if our free acid gets too high. The one kind of caveat with that would be with, more of our metal colorings, we don't really do a titration chemical control on those because they're such a concentrated caustic solution. There, we tend to monitor it based off of the boiling point. So for black oxides, we want to maintain a certain boiling point, and that boiling point helps us determine what the actual concentration is. So if we were to, let's say we have a boiling point that we need to be set at 286, for example. If the solution is boiling at a lower temperature, we know that, hey, we have too much water in our system because water is going to depress that boiling point. Conversely, if we start operating it and it's starting to boil up into a higher, let's say 290, for example, we know, hey, our solution's kind of over-concentrated at this point, and we need to carefully introduce more water into that bath in order to maintain that concentration adequately. And a lot of times people are like, well, can't you just heat it up and it's not necessarily going to give you a true representation of it? Well, with boiling points, you're never going to be able to increase the solution's boiling point. The more heat you put into it, it's going to be kind of kept at an upper limit of temperature until water is driven off. So that's how we can kind of guarantee what sort of concentration we're at based on the temperature that it's boiling.
I know you've often talked about bath control. Let's talk about that. Explain what those mean and how important they are for these immersion processes.
So, kind of with any chemical application, we always kind of go back to, the time, temperature, and the concentration. Well, time tends to be pretty general because either you have an operator that's going to be following an SOP for a certain part and say, hey, we need to be in this tank for this long, yada, 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 or it could be automated to where you have, a recipe or some sort of prescribed amount of time it's going to spend in each step. So that's not generally too much of an issue. Looking more so, the temperature, making sure that the temperature that we have the solution set at is kind of what it needs to be at. A lot of times, particularly with cleaners, they're set too low and you're not able to get the effective cleaning out of them. Or in the actual conversion step, sometimes that temperature has deviated away. So generally, we're going to find that applicators are going to have some sort of like a digital readout of the temperature, but making sure that actual readout with the thermocouple stays in range also. So, kind of checking the calibration of those thermocouples, at least on a weekly basis is important, because you'll be surprised at how often we go into a place and everything looks to be in the right temperature range, but then you go back and check it and the readouts, 10 degrees less than what it actually should be.
earlier on, you talked about whether, some of the mistakes is that people aren't using the correct post-treatment. So let's talk about that post-treatment for the corrosion protection. What does that entail, and what should people be aware of with that?
Most chemical application processes, particularly with the conversion coatings, you have done the work to either add on to the surface of that part with either crystal, or you've converted the surface to achieve some sort of metal coloring. You want to make sure that you're able to augment those properties by sealing in that change appropriately. So a lot of these applications are going to enhance the corrosion protection of the part on their own, but you can really optimize that by applying some sort of corrosion protection after the fact. So whether that be a water displacing oil, where that oil will seep in and displace any water that's on the surface of the parts, and it both enhance the corrosion protection, but also enhance kind of the visual appearance of the part. Also, you could do a water soluble oil where it's kind of leaves more of a dry or matte finish, which is oftentimes what's used in the automotive industry. Or sometimes you just need some short-term protection because that part's going to go on to, a painting process or a more tenacious, hard coating that's going to be applied on top of it. Making sure that you can get the right amount of in-house protection using a water-based sealant. That's another option as well. With the water displacing oils and the water soluble oils, those tend to be more so qualitative maintenance of the product. With the water displacing oils, you want to make sure that we are decanting off the water that's displaced. Typically, it's going to be down at the bottom of the tank. But if you let it build up too much, you're going to run into an issue where it starts to impact on the area of that tank where the parts are going to be immersed, and basically negates all of the properties that you're trying to use. We had a customer that they were using a water displacing oil after their black oxide operation, and they just weren't paying attention to the decanting of that water. And, they had pretty alkaline water that was coming in that had to be displaced. So over time, they just built up a really caustic aqueous layer that ended up mixing in with the oil. And at that point, there's nothing you can do because you just wasted a really expensive oil product, and they basically have to waste the whole thing because all the waxes that are in that product will actually crash out, and you really can't get them back into solution at that point.
Sometimes bring in a second set of eyes to look at lines, all right? Somebody who's not there working every single day, like yourself, somebody else from Hubbard-Hall, to come in and just really walk that line and look and see how things are, and talk with that team to make sure they are, again, being within the parameters that are properly set, because it seems to me that things drift a lot and get out of sync with that. And that's where, it doesn't become a problem again until it becomes a problem. And then, they've got rejected parts and such. But it sounds to me like that's something that a lot of shops should definitely look at, is getting some type of audit, getting something where you all can come in and kind of just, like you said, walk through and take a cursory look at things.
Absolutely.
Well, Connor, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I know we'll talk again and get some more information from you, but I very much appreciate this insight. Thanks.
Absolutely, Tim. Good talking to you.
Thanks for listening to Seen and Solved by Hubbard-Hall. For more episodes, visit hubbardhall.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to like and subscribe, rate and review, and join us on social media. Produced by Awcast.